Hello, welcome everybody to the PMI Northeast Ohio Chapter's Tech Thursdays webinar. Today we have 12 Reasons Why with Mike Jeber, and he's going to be talking about some of the challenges that businesses face with Agile and how we can overcome them. Let's level set some of the ground rules first. This is a webinar that happens every third Thursday of the month, and we're primarily focused on project management tools and techniques. This is the second webinar of this series. The previous webinar on scheduling happened last month, which is now available on the YouTube channel. If you guys go to that, you can see the recorded version of that webinar. Likewise, we are also recording this webinar, and it will be available on the chapter's YouTube channel in a few days. So for this webinar, for the upcoming webinar, we have Microsoft Teams and Planner Agile Project Management. This is something that we got a lot of feedback from our last webinar. We're going to be sending out a survey after this one as well. And a lot of people recommended some sort of content on Microsoft Teams. So that will be held on January 16th, 2020, which will be our first webinar of the following year. So I know a lot of you guys are interested in the PDU codes, and this webinar qualifies you for 1 technical hour, and the PDU code will be provided at the end of the presentation, so stick around and we will give out that information near the end. Throughout the webinar, Mike will be taking brief breaks and asking any questions. So as you guys are coming up with these questions, feel free to use Zoom's Q&A feature and type them in as they come into your head, or go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll bring them up to Mike as well. So again, like I mentioned, this will be available on the YouTube channel in a few days, and you can catch some of the old webinars as well. Please fill out the survey. That is really helpful. Helps us come up with the contents for the upcoming webinars, and helps keep the information relevant to what the users want. So without further ado, today's speaker is Mike Jeber. He is very experienced, 25 years working with senior management organizations in implementing Agile project management. He has worked with a lot of different departments and a lot of different organizations, and he's worked in improving system-wide performance and helping companies implement Agile practices. So as I mentioned, we're going to be going over some of the reasons and the difficulties that companies face in implementing Agile. So without further ado, Mike, would you want to start sharing your screen?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy holidays. Hope everybody is getting ready to shut down a little bit and spend some time with family and friends, getting ready for the next year, and kind of getting yourself recharged. So thank you for inviting me today and allowing me to take an hour of your time to talk about this subject matter. This is something that I talk a lot about with folks, especially when working with folks in a consulting or a coaching engagement. You know, a lot of our conversations usually start out with some of the challenges people are facing, and whether they are new to Lean and Agile, and you'll hear me include Lean a lot with Agile. I know this is focused on Agile, but Agile is really lean in its nature and its thought process. But when folks are looking to leverage those mindsets and to become an organization that thinks and acts in a more lean or agile way, this is where we start. We start talking about these things, especially when folks are trying to get started, or they've already tried and are having challenges in getting started with some of this material, or even scaling sometimes. So let me make sure we're on this page here. Now we're moving forward. So the rise in Agile in business. I want to talk about this a little bit, just as a brief background. A lot of you probably know some of this or have experience with it. And I think it's relevant to why some of these challenges exist today. So I start with a little acronym here that has been around for quite some time, VUCA. You hear this, it's a little cliche-ish, but it is really relevant in today's business environment, and actually in today's personal environment as well. We're all being faced with increased levels of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity, which is driving more ambiguity into our daily lives, both in our professional and personal spaces. And this is primarily due not only to technology, but just to the availability of information, the change in demands, the way humans interact around the globe and how reachable humans are around the globe. And the rate of change itself is just continuing to increase. That alone, along with all these other things that we're dealing with on a daily basis, really is driving the interest in agile and lean mindsets, values, principles, and the techniques that go along with those mindsets. Looking at businesses are really looking for help in dealing with VUCA. When I talk to folks today, really what they're trying to do, when you break it all down, most folks are looking for ways to deal with this in a very helpful manner. When you think about what we've done up until about the last 10 years, organizations were really focused on facilitating through mastering hard skills, looking at solid plans, managing schedule and scope, maintaining accountability, and a whole host of other hard skills that we have mastered over time that we apply and utilize within our spaces. And we call this our business skills or our business knowledge that we have. But moving forward, and from today and moving forward on, especially in the next few coming years, we're really going to need to start adding to that. And I notice I say add and not replace. This is really an addition type activity that we're talking about in terms of adding adaptable approach elements into what we're doing, becoming more adaptable, taking those mastered hard business skills that we have and create and allowing them to operate or function and flow within our systems in a way that's a lot more flexible, in a way that's more innovative, in a way that's more engaging and collaborative, and in a way that allows us to operate at the pace of change that business is operating today, and with the increased expectations and the ever-changing expectations of the folks that we work with and that we work for. Those being the end customers and clients we provide our products and services to. So this idea of adaptive skills being added to what we've done previously in our careers is definitely something that is necessary in order to be dealing with and managing and handling VUCA in a successful way. So leveraging lean and agile values actually help to enhance adaptive skills. And this is one reason why they are so popular in looking to find relief and to gain advantage in this new space. When we think about lean and we think about agile in the modern sense, really what we're thinking about, and this is breaking it down to just the kind of the core thought. There's a lot behind each of these. We're going over this very quickly today, but I want to get folks thinking that are attending today about these things in these manners. When you look at the modern definition of lean, you're really breaking it down. If you're putting it across not just manufacturing, but if you're putting it across the whole space of business and service opportunities, you're really looking at it from the standpoint of about virtually improving everything that you do continuously and learning how to see and then eliminate anything that doesn't provide value or produce value. And you really focused on a value element. When you're looking at the modern definition of agile, and I like Michael's definition here, agile is a collection of values and principles that encourage a certain type of behavior, focus on value generation and collaboration. It's really, if you take the Agile Manifesto, if you've had a chance to look at it or know it, and just take out all of the technical terms, take out the word software and introduce the idea of value or delivery, then you're really getting back down to the point of what the manifesto creators were getting at. I've worked and paired with about 3 of them and done different activities, and I've asked them about this. And when you think about what they were doing, they were all trying to interact with a different part of their business in a tighter way, with other parts of their organization that were motivated by different things. They had a different language, they had different outcomes and goals and objectives they were provided from their organization. So when you put these two together, you're talking about looking at the adaptive improvement of the flow of work through a system alongside the adaptive improvement of flow of communication and collaboration along an organization. And the interesting thing is this people side is really where you need to start. the most complex element of any system, any organization, any company, any club or group or anything that you're doing, regardless of what it is that you deliver and how technical or complex the delivery is, are the human beings. They're the most complex elements in each of these systems. So it's really important to get that people side going and to really think about this. Now, when you think about becoming agile, it's often described being agile, and I use the capital A agile here, as being a simple solution to the complex VUCA problem that exists today. But it's often very difficult to transition and to start. Why is that? This is kind of the core of what we're talking about today. Before we get into these elements, I do want to take a pause here real quick and ask Prasanna to see if there are any questions so far.
Hey, Mike, we do not have any questions yet, but I do want to encourage all the participants to please ask your questions. This is a great time to get some insight, so that'd be great. But you can go ahead, Mike. There are no questions so far.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about these. Now, these aren't the only 12 sources of challenge that you may run across when you're trying to start or expand or scale an agile mindset into your organization, but they're the most common ones that you're probably going to run across. And I would say the biggest culprits to a challenge or the biggest impediments to being able to successfully move forward with low friction. Starting out, many companies are asking for Agile and don't accurately know why they are challenged. I get this all the time. The idea that, hey, we should be doing Agile. Agile is the thing to be doing. And when they look at this and they go to implement it, they don't understand what it is that they're challenged with. So they don't really understand what Agile is going to provide to them in terms of value, and they don't understand how it's going to impact them in terms of being able to adopt different mindsets and techniques, as well as what should we look at for improvement, and what kind of involvement or investment do I need to make with my time, my people, and my money in order to make this something that's a value add to my company and not just a distraction or something that's a short-term goal. The value of Agile is contextual in nature for each organization. This is why frameworks, while they're great starting points, are not end solutions. There's no Agile solution out there because there's no one Agile value or benefit. Those things are specific to each organization. What they're going to get is dependent upon a lot of factors. And having that context and thinking about it in a situational or contextual manner is really important to make sure that A, you understand where you're starting. If you're starting at the right point, you have the right elements, and then you know what the next steps will be and what is the value that we're shooting for now and then the next phase and further into the future, because this is a continuous improvement or a continuous learning type of mindset that you're bringing into this as well, which is where some of that lean base comes into Agile. Agile does not have one body of knowledge, even though it has one origin. You look at PMI, for example. You have your PMBOK. That is the body of knowledge. And even in the project management space, there are really two bodies of knowledge that are recognized globally around the world that people can go to and reference. You look up Agile on the website, or you go to find the body of knowledge for Agile, and it is all over the place. And that is simply because there isn't a body of knowledge. There's an origin, and it's a mindset, it's values and principles where it starts. But the reason there's no body of knowledge is because it wasn't intended to be a body of knowledge. It was values and principles that were North Stars or compasses or guiding lights to be able to look at your activity and say, are we driving this in the right direction? Is it driving the right types of behavior? Is it driving the right types of communication and collaboration? Can we see measurable value coming from this? So this does create a big challenge. And it's one of the sources for the next thing here, which is Agile information is available from many sources, and they don't always align. That, again, comes from the fact that there isn't a body of knowledge, and there are a lot of folks out there that are working very hard to try to become the body of knowledge. This is kind of an interesting dilemma, because Agile, and you talk to the manifesto creators, it was intended that it was supposed to change and move with the times, that it wasn't supposed to be static. Now, they went back 10 years after creating the manifesto and looked at it and said, well, so far it's still holding water, so they didn't change anything. But the idea was that if it didn't make sense now, if times had changed and things needed to be modified, that they would go in and do modifications, because the idea about being agile is not about speed. Speed is a result of being agile. It's about being being adaptable. It's about being able to meet whatever's coming at you. The idea that change is accepted and that we're going to look at it and we're going to try to take advantage of it and that it will never end marries well with the VUCA environment that we're in, and it allows for the right type of thinking to be going on, which drives the right type of activity to be able to take advantage of change instead of being derailed by it. Agile started in IT and is being adopted by non-IT organizational elements. So if you take the manifesto and you take a lot of the language that's IT driven and even other subjects now that have evolved out of this, DevOps and a lot of other areas, IT was the driving factor because everybody that attended in Utah when they wrote this up they were programmers. They were involved in IT. That's where it was born. When you really think about Agile had a lot of lean thinking in it. Lean was born out of, the modern version of lean and lean flow was born out of the industrial era. And it even goes back farther than that. It goes all the way back to the pyramids when you're thinking about how far lean and lean thinking goes. But that concept of where it started and where it generated kind of skews the language and the vocabulary that you use in talking and describing this. However, since it's really about people and it's really about collaboration amongst people to drive value, it can be applied to a lot of different places. You just need to get past the language barriers and start to look at what does that mean in my space, in my industry, my part of the company, let alone what type of company I work for. Agile has been evolving for the last 19 years. It's a moving target. And like I said before, it's intended to be a moving target. The idea is that it shouldn't be static enough that it actually goes out of date. It should, the concept or the mindset of being adaptable in itself, by definition, should be able to live indefinitely as things change moving forward. So looking at the next 6, Agile is often looked at for its techniques and tools without its philosophy. This is the concept of getting in and saying, I want to be more Agile. I want to do Agile things. I want to utilize Agile tools and I want to use Agile frameworks. A lot of folks, their businesses are structured around a framework or a tool. So this adds to that noise around what Agile is or isn't or should or shouldn't be. Tools are great. Frameworks are great. They're all elements to being able to learn and leverage, but it's really about the philosophy. And if you don't start with the philosophy and you start with the tools and techniques first, what you don't understand, you don't have that guiding light or that compass to be able to say, are we doing things that are going to help us? If we're driving towards those philosophies, those values and principles, we can see measurable change happen with certain elements that represent those things happening in our space. Without that guiding light, without that North Star or that compass, it makes the tools and techniques, while you may get some tactical advantage out of it, you're never going to get the full strength of what being agile and being adaptable is in the organization. And it's probably going to stop at a certain point. You're going to run into kind of call it a plateau barrier, where you're going to get to a certain point and not see any more improvement or not know how to get the next level of improvement within your organization. Many agile sources have their own agendas. We talked about this a little bit in some of the other boxes that came up. That concept of we are trying to be, there are groups out there that are looking to be the source for, quote, capital A agile, unquote, instead of saying, how do I help folks be more adaptable and be more agile, lowercase or small a agile, in terms of the way that they operate. This comes back to the concept of, are you helping someone, or are you looking, the information that you're providing, is it helping someone build adaptable capabilities, or is it helping them leverage a tool, a technique, a framework that is great for certain situations, or maybe a great starting point, but that you're going to have to modify and change and adapt to your own contextual situational space where you operate. If you don't give folks those adaptable capabilities alongside of the tools and techniques, they're not going to be able to modify and manage this moving forward without having someone hold their hand every time they want to do a change, or they want to do their next round of improvement. Oops, sorry about that. The meaning of agile is often distorted to fit someone's vision or comfort zone. This is something that I've experienced a lot over the last 10 years, especially when an organization is looking to adopt or become more agile, and it's being driven from the top down. A lot of times from the top down, they're saying, look, I want my organization to be more agile because I want more speed out of my groups. Or they are looking for something that helps them achieve something that they're looking to do without really considering or understanding that if you're going to leverage these things and you're going to increase collaborative capabilities amongst people, that all the people have to be involved. And that includes some of the folks that are actually initiating this. A lot of folks have challenges getting started in this area, where you find a group of champions that are saying, this is something that can really help us. They have all the right mindsets around it. They understand what the meaning of this really is and what it can provide in terms of value, but they have a hard time getting through the politics or the history or the culture or the existing culture of that organization, and what that is. You even get some of that vision, or distorted vision from some of the suppliers of folks that are offering training, that are offering coaching and consulting, because they're trying to work you towards a specific way of implementing a specific version of Agile that they have perfected and honed and tuned, but they also own and manage. This can be valuable for some folks, but again, it's so contextual and situational in nature that it's really, really hard to say that there is one situation or one approach, one tool set, or a technique that applied the same way will provide the same results for everyone. Agile is often looked at as a standalone solution for improvement. The reason I included Lean even with this conversation is that it's really a part of a series of different things that you can do to really get the full advantage of all of the values and principles, showing measurable results within your organization. You combined Agile with a lot of the techniques and the mindsets and the values and principles with lean thinking, with systems thinking, with appreciative inquiry, with a lot of organizational design or organizational theories, with a lot of lean management techniques, with a lot of change management, modern change management techniques. You get much more out of it when you're combining it with other things and when you're blending it with other things, than you do on its own. It's really, since it's going after the people side, for the most part, that's one element of what you want to do to impact your organization and to impact your area for positive gain and to be able to see measurable improvement. But it's not the only thing that you want to do. Some cultures are rigid or highly resistant to lean and agile philosophy. Now, again, this is kind of a general statement. It's not true in every case, but from my experience in working with different companies, both internally as an employee and as a coach / consultant, what I find is that the newer or younger that the company is, the closer the company's culture is to current state culture within the business world and within the social world out there, which the two are very hard to separate anymore. The older or the larger the scale of the organization, those two things tend to make that culture farther away from what the modern cultures that are evolving, both in the business and personal spaces, what those are becoming today and what they're going to change to in the future. So depending on where that starting point is, there are going to be different things you're going to need to do. Some of those may require a lot more legwork up front. Some may require a lot more investment in trying to get folks to a certain point to where you can start talking about these things. In other cultures and other situations where the scale is smaller and the company's younger, that culture and their adaptability is already kind of inherent and ingrained when they started the organization because of when they started and the size of the organization. So they have an ability to really affect that in different ways. So that's a consideration depending on where you're coming from. That's also situational, contextual in nature and starting points, and also scaling. And then finally, this is not last, but it's certainly very important. Commitment of leadership to participate in the adoption journey is a non-negotiable. You have to have what I call air cover, regardless of where an agile adoption or the desire to have more adaptable capabilities inside your organization starts from. You have to have enough time and you have to have enough purview over a certain element of an organization to be able to have an impact, to be able to do some of the things that we just talked about. So you may need to do some more groundwork. You may need to get things started. It's not going to happen instantaneously, and you're going to want to have some support, aka air cover, to say we're going to make sure that you have an environment that is well suited to allow what needs to happen so that we can start to see measurable results, and we can start to prove to ourselves internally and others around the organization that this is something that not only can we do, but it's valuable to do, and that we should be doing it. So that's a really, really important part of this. So I've gone through these 12 items, and again, we'll make sure you guys all get copies of this, and I guess this is going to be available in terms of a recording as well for the future. I want to pause here and see if there are any questions before we go on to the next section.
Hey, Mike, we still do not have any questions, but I do have a question of my own. So
Okay.
We talked a lot about how Agile is about adaptability and being iterative.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to, my question is about how do you plan for something that is adaptable and is inevitably going to change? So how can you, for example, forecast your project end date if you know that things will change between now and then?
It's a difference in approach. So what you're doing is you're changing the way that you approach things. If you're becoming more adaptable in the way that you operate and you execute, you're going to use some new techniques. You're going to take some of the techniques you use today. You may augment them a little bit to make them more adaptable. Some of these things can be done simply through changing the duration. A lot of times when you look at it, I'm working with a couple of companies now that they still do annual planning. And when they look at their annual plan, if you look at their business environment, their space that they're in, their actual space, the cycles of change happen in shorter than a year's time. So they are planning out in farther distance than their cycle of changes within their space. So a lot of it is contextual and situational to groups, and you try to do it iterative to your point is how do you just get a little bit better? If you think about it, you apply a continuous improvement mindset, which is how do I get a little bit better? I don't have to solve everything today, but how can I get a X amount better over this than I am today? What does that look like? What would that measurable metric or that milestone look like? And then you start to look at what are the low-hanging fruit opportunities? What are the things I can do right away? What are the things that we think we're going to need to be able to do that we just don't have the ability to do? And what are the elements that are keeping us from doing that? And then you build an improvement roadmap that says these are the types of things that we're going to have to overcome, or we're going to have to look at and address in order to take advantage of some of these other things that we know will help us get more adaptable in the way that we approach work. So it becomes a way that you do this. For your example, like predicting, I've seen a lot of different successful implementations of this. Different companies, depending on their culture, their history, their politics, their industry, what they do, whether they're delivering durable goods that are highly complex or services, maybe those are highly complex too, but services and durable goods are different. You know, you have physical versus non-physical elements. Same thing with it's like software versus cars, right? There's a little difference in the way that you can do things. You need to be specific about that. You need to try to take advantage of that. Where are there elements we can be adaptable in? But the idea is building now an approach, a cadence, a rhythm that you can start to do and still come up with information. You know, things need to get done. They need to deliver. They need to have certain things have specific dates that you can't miss. Other things have dates that are more like, when is the value going to be ready? That's when we need to deliver. How can we get the value quicker so we can deliver quicker? You know, you look at those different types of projects, and you may be able to handle one or the other early on, but then you'll figure out and find ways as you get used to adopting and finding ways to bring in adaptable capabilities, whatever that happens to be, into your space that work for you. Those ahas start to come out, and each group starts to figure out, well, now I can go after this. Well, now I can go after that. So it's very contextual and situational. It sounds kind of vague in the way that I'm describing it, but there's actually there's a very deliberate approach to find out what those things are for every organization. And the way that you go through that approach is actually executed differently and situationally at each company, but the approach is consistent. You can learn the approach, you can adopt the approach, and then you can start to apply self-applied continuous improvement within the organization that's sustainable and continues on forever without needing somebody from the outside there. which I think in my mind, that's the goal. You want to be able to do this for yourself. Hopefully that helps answer the question a little bit. It's a little more complex than we can go through in detail today, but there's definitely a way to go about that. And it is specific and situational to each company, but it is being achieved. It's a solved problem. And whenever I go into with another local group in Cleveland, I'm talking to them today about the challenge that they're dealing with. There's 2 other groups in town that have already dealt with that challenge. It's just not solved here yet. But it's going to be easy to identify what are the things we need to go after to be able to do the things we need to do to be able to give more predictability and consistency in our forecasting with less data more often. And that's kind of where the approach changes.
Yeah, that answers my question. That was helpful. Thanks.
Okay, certainly. Any other items that have come up since we were talking about that?
There's nothing so far, but we can stop again. Yep.
Perfect. Well, now we'll move into how do you do this, right? So how does an individual organization weed through all the noise to find the best way to become agile and adaptable? First and foremost, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Talk about the value of agile from the human perspective. You really got to start there, and this gets skipped over so many times. You go straight to a technique or a tool, we're not talking about people. When that's the most complex thing and the thing that's got to change, usually the most. It's the hardest thing to change. If your culture and your people's mindsets and the identity, like I said, a younger company, they tend to be closer to current state of the environment. So there's less of a journey to make there. But if the culture is older, if the company's older and the scale is larger, it's going to take longer time. So you need to really go after this human perspective. Again, Agile helps humans interact effectively with other humans. If you boil everything else down, it's behaviors, mindsets, values, and principles, primarily focused on communication and collaboration with an emphasis on quality, alignment, and consensus. This idea of speed, it's an output. It's an output to us collaborating better as humans with each other, to getting all of the waste, the lean concept of waste, out of our communications and collaboration. Most of that is injected in self-imposed. It's things that we can change, and even things that we can change within the current environment in a lot of cases. And that's part of the approach of kind of figuring out where your starting state is and figuring out what those things would be. Also, this, I don't know how many folks see some familiarity in this graph on the right-hand side here. The bell curve that's underneath the kind of wavy red line here is a representation of Rogers' innovation adoption curve. It's a curve on how people adopt certain newness to their environment. We'll use the iPhone as a great example. You know, when the iPhone came out, it was a very new thing. It was really different from the other phones that were out there. Your early innovators, you see these different groups: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. Those are different personas in the life cycle of adopting something new. You have people that are the innovators are going to be outside the Apple store the minute the new iPhone comes out. They're going to be camping out waiting to get it. The early adopters are going to be ones, I'm not going to go camp out, but the minute it's available in the stores, I'm getting it, or I'm ordering it. Whenever it comes to me, it's coming. They don't need a lot of convincing or a lot of data to help them decide that they're moving on to the next thing. That's just part of who they are. That's how they're wired. We'll talk about the chasm in a little bit, but the early majority, they're looking at it from, hey, yeah, I want it to come out, but I'm not going to wait at this. I'm not going to wait outside, and I don't need to pay the exorbitant price of when it first comes out. But when it becomes available in mass, and I know that like the first revision of software updates are done, and it's not so buggy, I'll go ahead and grab it. The late majority, they want all those things. Plus, hey, I want to make sure support is good for this. I want to make sure that if I have any problems, it's going to be there, and I want to make sure they're going to take care of my old phone, that they're going to take it in, that I don't have to deal with anything, and that it's going to be very seamless and very painless for me to do this. And the laggards, it's not a derogatory term. It just means that they're really lagging in terms of adopting the new thing. They like their Blackberries. They like their flip phones. They don't necessarily need everything that the Apple has, nor are they interested in it. And they're just not. It's just not something that they're probably going to go for in the first place. Now, these personas exist in every organization and every walk of life and every group of human beings put together. Same thing happens within your organization, and it's you can apply anything. He calls it innovation adoption, but really anything that's change related. And this idea of the chasm is where you scale. You can see that the very small percent, about 20%, a little bit less than 20% are the early adopters and innovators on average. And when you look at this, that's the group that's always going for this. And you can see this curvy line going around that peak expectations are there because you've got all these very motivated people that are all driving this thing, and all the wowness is coming out. Right now, when you get into the chasm, you're getting into stuff that's trying to expand it or scale it into those other personas that aren't necessarily as super gung-ho about whatever the new thing is that's coming out. They've got a lot of questions. They've got a lot of expectations. Before they're ready to move, you're going to have to answer a lot of questions. And you get this kind of trough of disillusionment because all of a sudden the momentum slows down. Once you start getting those things to the folks that they require to kind of move over, you start seeing the slip of enlightenment, and then you get this plateau effect where this is about as much as you're going to get out of this new item. Now, given that, we're talking about this from the human perspective. That's all people. That's psychology, that's sociology, that's all of this put together. When you think about how you're going to help someone adopt something new, and in our case, we're talking about adaptable capabilities in Agile, you really need to give them some space. This I learned in a very painful way over a lot of time by not doing this and not understanding why I wasn't able to help folks, or I wasn't able to help get them to see that what it is that we were trying to do was going to be helpful to them. I had folks come to me and say, if you can get Bob over here, Bob doesn't like change. He doesn't like to do anything different. If you can convince him that this is a great thing, then we'll go ahead. We'll know that you're talented at what you do. We'll know that it's valuable, and we'll go ahead and do it. And what I didn't realize coming in when I was early on in my consulting career was, great, I know this stuff is good. I've helped people. It's helped me. I'll get in there and help Bob. And what I didn't realize is I didn't understand these different personas within the organization. Bob, in every case, was on the laggard side. He wasn't interested in change. He didn't want change. It doesn't mean that change was bad. It just meant that was not his interest from the get-go. So I would bang my head up against the wall and say, why can't I get Bob? Why can't I convince Bob that this is so good for him when I know that it is? I proved it with all these things. Sometimes you need to give folks a chance to empty the glass. Get them an opportunity to make some space for something new that you're going to put in there. Otherwise, you're whatever you say is going in one ear and out the other, and they're just not interested. There's no room in their mental space to be able to take on something else because there's just so much going on, and you're not going to be able to drive or motivate interest there, even if you're in the early majority or late majority. Looking at generating ahas for yourself first. I've learned over time that I can't help people and help give them ahas if I'm not getting ahas about the group that I'm working with first. So if you're doing this internally or you're looking for someone to help you outside, make sure you're spending a lot of time to understand what those are, what's going on in current state. What does current state look like? Generate those ahas for yourself to start getting some understanding and conclusions around that. That will help go a long way towards helping you to discover where are there potential ahas and how do I structure that conversation to start showing people that you've got opportunity here. And it's going to resonate with them. A, they've got space in the glass for it now. And B, I'm hitting home on something that I know is something that of interest to the group because I've sat and listened and learned about what they're dealing with. Building psychological safety. You hear this out there a lot. It's almost become buzzwordish. And it's really, really necessary. Hard to achieve in some cases. Again, that idea of history, politics, scale, scope, keeping things small, working with areas that you have support. It will help you build psychological safe spaces over a period of time. Make sure you've got a long enough period of time that you can do things and you can play and experiment a little bit in a risk responsible way, but that's how you build the psychological safety in microcosms, in micro units. And then what you do is you basically radiate that out when you're having your successes and show people here are the things that needed to be in place for this to be able to grow. I talk about folks planting seeds. If you've got folks out there that are trying to do something new and you want them to grow corn, that's what you're trying to get them to do. Well, they can't do it in the middle of a forest. You've got to make sure that the ground and everything is prepped and ready so that when you go ahead and try to do something new, you're expecting an outcome of nice tall stalks of corn and you want to be able to harvest this stuff. You need sunlight, you need water, you need the ground to be prepped, you need the trees to be gone, you need the rocks to be out, you need to till the soil, make sure it's ready to go. These are things that leadership needs to do, or anybody that's a champion in the organization. And that's how you start to build psychological safety, is you build that environment that is conducive to actually doing the types of things that we're going to start doing to show adaptable capabilities. Lean startup, your approach. We don't have time to go into what lean startup is today, but essentially it's a way to get small versions of what your idea is, get hypothesis built in small little bundles or small batches, and then push those things out as quickly as you can in a responsible way to get feedback on those hypotheses, so that you're not going along and developing something big and finding out at the end that you missed the marker there, that you just didn't have it right in the first place. It saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of cost, it saves a lot of frustration, and usually it saves a lot of work, because you end up finding that you can get a lot more, hit most of what people are looking for, and a lot less than what you thought you needed. Leveraging the strengths, this is really key. Listening and generating ahas for yourself is part about learning about the strengths of the existing organization. You want to carry and bring those strengths with you. You do not want to crush them. You do not want to eliminate them. You don't want to accidentally or inadvertently cover them up or not leverage them. So by listening in the beginning, you're finding out what those strengths are, and you're able to help turn those strengths to leverage this. This will help accelerate the velocity of learning and the velocity of improvement within the organization. Small wins early, make it small, show wins, prove it to the folks that are trying it out, and prove to yourself that you're making an impact, that you're having the positive influence that you're looking for, and you're getting measurable results that you can start talking about and start radiating out to folks. Now you're at the point where you can start generating ahas for the team. You've got enough activity going on, you've got enough things going on, you understand enough in the environment, you've got the psychological space, you've got a cadence of doing small hypotheses and trying small things out, that you're now moving forward and you're able to start generating a little more velocity, a little increased velocity in the different types of things you're achieving. You're helping to build ownership by doing it this way too, because you've got people involved. You're not doing it for them, you're doing it with them, and you're doing it at a pace that's responsible and sustainable for where they are today in their capabilities and their ability to learn and grow, given current commitments and everything else that's going on in their workday. You can start to lead from the rear at that point when things start getting better, and then you want to make sure you manage expectations. And this is this whole idea about looking at the expectations in the front, knowing that, hey, when I get through the first 15 or 20% of the interested people here, it's gonna get slower. It's gonna get harder. We're gonna have a lot more to do and a lot more conversation. We're gonna need to help folks a lot more, because they have more needs in they're in that part of the adoption curve that they need more in order to be able to feel comfortable to go with you on this journey. So, looking at the approach about becoming more agile, look for an approach to become agile, which is agile in nature. So becoming capital A agile by being small agile in the way that you operate. You want to be able to learn a little bit. You want to gain knowledge. You typically do that through training, but you also gain knowledge through doing. So it's usually a blend or a combination of that is what I've found to be best. You want to be able to map out. You want to contextually plan what you've learned, what you've understood when you've gone through this. And you usually do that through workshop type activity, whether you're doing it yourself or you're having someone else come in from the outside. These are the ways that I found that you get the quickest amount of learning, the quickest amount of ahas, and the quickest and the easiest assimilation of the new information into the folks that have to learn it and wield it. They're able to wield it faster and more successfully early on. And then looking at this application, and you're going to iterate. As you mentioned earlier, this idea of iterating through this, you may take one subject, one small area, and you're going to gain knowledge about it, contextually plan about how you're going to take that knowledge and how you're going to apply it to current state. And that gaining knowledge also means a good understanding of current state, not just the new things that you want to do. And then contextually applying that in a responsible, risk appropriate way to the organization and where you are at that time, iterating through until you get to the point where that subject or that small area, that hypothesis you're working on, is becoming more sustainably used. At this point, you're starting to adopt something. You've figured out that you want to keep it. You're starting to use it. It's becoming more natural. It's less of a technique and more of who you are. Then that's sustainable usability. That's becoming part of your new culture that you're building, or you're adding on to your existing culture with these elements. And then you typically only need support, either from the internal folks that have done it before or from whoever you're working with on the outside. Think about adaptable over defined. You need to value this. And I'm going to use the structure that the Agile Manifesto creators used. We value adaptable capabilities, planning, and execution over defined roles, frameworks, and systems. Now, does this mean we get rid of them? No. It just means that value delivery and agility will increase the more you can move from the right to the left. And they happen to be less impacted and more capable in handling your VUCA environment that's coming at you from the outside. When you think about this, the idea of given that VUCA nature, you're really looking to find ways to be able to move and flow with that VUCA disruption and make it less of a disruption and more of an opportunity for improvement or an opportunity to make advancements. Think about contextual over best. We value contextual learning, integration, and adoption over best practices, best application, and best implementation. Why? It's more actionable and it's more adoptable when you think about it contextually. When you take best, you may not be in a situation to take what the industry best is and implement it. You may have to take steps, small steps or many steps to get to the point where you're even close to being able to be ready to take on what is considered today to be best applications and practices and implementation of what's going on. It's also harder to right size these things. Again, capabilities and benefit increase as you move to the left. Now, this is my big thing, and this is a personal pet peeve of mine, but I know a lot of others where it's the same thing. This idea of best for whom. You have to really think about best, and when you hear that, it's not necessarily best for you. This is all contextual and situational. You have to be thinking about your specific situations. And while a lot of what you read and learn from different areas can be very applicable, how you can implement, how implementable it is, how right-sized it is for what you're doing, how adoptable and actionable is it for you today could be completely different. So there's ways to chew on that elephant to get it eaten, but it's going to be different. You're going to start at a different part of that elephant wherever you go, and some people already have part of it done. So the concept of thinking about and asking yourself best for whom when you're talking about an approach or a way to start doing this, really consider that if you're the champion or the person looking to start something within your organization or expand what you already have. I ask this question of folks when I do this presentation in other places. I know we can't really ask this here because of our format, but I'll give you a few minutes to think, or a few seconds to think about it. Do you know what this is? And I thought this was an interesting picture when I found it. It's a little, you may have guessed what it is. You may not. It may be a little strange, but this is the Moses Bridge. It's in the Netherlands, and it is a bridge. They call it a bridge. It doesn't go over the water. It doesn't go over the area that they're trying to take you from point A to point B like a traditional bridge does. But I thought this was interesting when I saw this for this topic of keeping things familiar. When you look at what you're trying to do, when you're trying to move forward, you're injecting change or something new into your environment. You want to build your future. You want to build the bridge to your future, that path, that journey with familiar elements, especially a lot of them in the early stages. Because as you learn new things, those will become familiar and you can start adding more. But if you start all the way with this concept on the right and say, hey, go ahead and go through that. There are some kids, I think, that their eyes wouldn't even come up to the level of the water. It's a little creepy to think you're walking through the water to go over this as a bridge when you think about a traditional bridge of going over this thing. You want to make sure you're building with familiar elements and make sure that the group is kind of learning as they go with that. You'll lower the anxiety, you'll lower the stress level around change itself, and you'll tend to find more of those folks that are early majority and late majority will move quicker over that bell curve towards you into being more innovators types when it comes to the adoption that you're trying to make. Also, bring what works with you. Let folks take what works with them now as they cross over this bridge, even if it makes the journey a little longer or if it goes outside of the best practice to implement this, the best way to implement this, or the conventional way to do it, because it matters to making sure that you don't lose the people that you're bringing along. It's hard to build that trust. If you lose that trust early on, it's going to be very difficult to get those folks to come along on this journey, and it may stunt or slow the growth or the adoption of building adaptable capabilities considerably within the organization. So make sure you do that, implement and understand what those are, understand those strengths, and implement and engage that, weave it into whatever it is that you're trying to do at your location. And then make sure you iterate with purpose. You know, this is kind of a design thinking model that you see on the right-hand side. And design thinking is a good way to think about designing the implementation of how you're going to and what adaptable capabilities will be for you. You're starting out with something that you're not familiar with, and you want to be able to find a way to figure out what should that be for us, what's good for us, what can we do now, and what will we do later. And this concept of design thinking and the way that you approach this works really well here. Think about evolution over revolution. It's a lot less risky to current commitments. It's a lot less risky to the actual growth and maturity of something, of a journey of this type within the organization. It's going to have a better chance of influencing and being attached to current culture and helping to sway that culture in a way that's going to be more friendly to VUCA and more friendly to the innovative, adoptive needs of the marketplace you're in. Make sure you right-size the learning speed. If you don't have a lot of time in the beginning, take it slow. Find some capacity, get that capacity back, apply a portion of it towards what you're doing in terms of capacity delivery, and apply a portion of it towards continuous improvement. And then as you get your next set of improvements, do the same thing. And pretty soon, you've got continuous improvement as part of your daily activity. Contextual and situational. Always, always, always remember, question and say, are we pointing towards the values and principles, and are we being true to ourselves and contextual and situational to our needs today and our capabilities today? Right size the cultural impact. Some cultures, again, can take it on a lot in the early stages. Some are very resistant. You've got to be understanding of what that is. You've got to find ways to make improvements, show measurable success, show the actual improvements that are going on, and then continue to move forward from there. And then again, generate meaningful metrics. People need to see, you need to break this down into data. You're moving a lot of cheese around here. People are going to get very emotional. There's a lot of anxiety around it, especially the folks on that adoption curve that are farther to the right. Having measurable metrics and meaningful metrics are ways to have conversations that bring down anxiety levels, they bring down conflict, they lower the stress level around talking about change, and they start to allow change in conversations, the collaboration, the human part of the collaboration, to happen more freely in a more productive way with less stress. You want to broadcast these successes. You need an internal capability to basically market what you're doing and show people what you're doing to make sure that they have the opportunities to see that value, especially for the folks that are farther down that value stream or farther down that adoption curve. They need to see these things happening before they're going to be interested to start having conversations with you. And last but not least, you have to inject fun into this journey. It is a stressful thing to change. Any change implementation can always generate anxiety and stress. Making sure that you try to make it as fun, that you get people involved, that you get ownership involved, you get their ideas and concepts and understand where they're coming from, what means something to them, what matters to them, and make this enjoyable as you go along. Because it's going to be hard. It's a lot of hard lifting. Why not make it fun while you do it as you move along? So I'm going to stop there and see what questions we have from the group.
We have a couple questions. I'm going to ask one from my side first. So having worked in a lot of different industries, have you seen that there are certain industries where implementing Agile has been more of a challenge? And what did you do to kind of overcome that challenge?
So it wasn't an industry that was more challenging. I would say that the thing that I found that's a more of a, call it a common metric or something it's a reoccurring situation, is the scale and age of the company tends to drive some familiar activity at different organizations. For example, if you've got a company that is 150 years old, they have culture that predates electricity. That's going to be something that is ingrained into what they do. How was the company formulated? If it was formulated, there's a couple companies in town I worked with that produce products. They were formed by inventors, and those companies have a little bit of an inventor's intuitiveness and a willingness to try new things, simply because when it was started as an invention company by an inventor. They're big companies now, but they've always retained that as part of their DNA. The company's smaller, if it started within the last 20 years, or especially the last 10 years, their challenges are they're trying to scale, they're trying to get bigger, but they're trying to maintain that culture, which is really close to what they have, what you need today to be adaptable. They were already pretty adaptable when they started because that's what the environment was like when they started. So it's really about the size and the scale and the age of the company that tends to lead towards common things in their culture, in their history, in their politics that affect your ability to work with people, to gain trust, to build trust, and inevitably to start leveraging adaptable capabilities and improving communication and collaboration amongst the people in the organization, because those processes have been around for much longer, and they tend to drive a lot of the cultural elements in there. So that's the one thing I would say would be the common thing. The thing that you do to overcome that is you need to, like I said before, listen, get ahas for yourself. start to understand what those strengths and weaknesses are, when you start to see those common patterns, you know the type of approaches that work. You help them get through those challenges first, and you make sure that everything is visible and transparent. If you're really going after this, especially someone who's an older company, you want to make sure you have to have, in order to have predictability, you need to have consistency. In order to have consistency, you need to have consensus amongst the people that are doing the work. You need to have alignment amongst those people in order to have consensus, and you need to have participation and visibility of the work and of the environment and of what the people are doing in order to have alignment and consistency, or alignment and commitment. So if you're thinking about being innovative and generating trust in the organization, you've got to have all those elements, no matter where or when the company started, how big or what their challenges are. So the approach can be the same. What you're having to do and where you're starting at on that scale from participation and visibility down to consistency and predictability can be different depending on how big or how old the company is. And that's typically the pattern that you see. You can use that same approach, but you don't always start in the same place because of the different elements that are already in place at that organization.
Okay, I think that is helpful. And then we also have another question from one of the participants, and they are asking about any additional content that might help them get started. They say, as someone who is new to Agile, where do you suggest starting? What books, podcasts, or videos would be good to use, other than the Tech Thursdays webinar, of course?
You know, I've got some stuff that I've put together with a few people. What I can do is I can gather that data, I can gather some of that information, and give that to you in persona, and make sure that folks have access to that. There's a lot of great places. If you want a couple of quick things, it's very interesting. There's a couple of quick things. You wouldn't think they're really kind of agile in nature, but if you want a couple of quick YouTube things to go for, you can look at. There's one they call it "Why Emails Start Fights." That's a fun one. It's literally a 3-minute video, but it is eye-opening and can talk about why it's so frustrating with the way that people utilize different communication tools, how it affects the messaging and it affects relationships and communication and collaboration within the organization. And it can actually be expanded out to a lot of what you're doing. And also there's another one, there's a book called Turn the Ship Around. It's by a gentleman who was a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine captain of a nuclear submarine that actually had nuclear missiles on it, not just nuclear in its operation for the engines. And there's a video out there. If you were to Google "Turn This Ship Around" on YouTube, you'll find that there's like a pictogram video with the author talking in the background at one of his conferences, and it really lays out the concept of providing intent and how he took a situation that he was forced into and had no way around. There was no way to win at this situation, and it forced him into trying something new and radical only because he had no other choice. What's funny is a lot of us sometimes find very innovative ways to handle things when we have no other choice, when there are no good options available. All options are bad. And it's amazing what you can come up with when you're put into that type of situation. And that's another one it's a good book, but it's also a nice little video. It's about 10 minutes, another short one that gives you a taste or a flavor of the mindset that you need to get into when you're thinking about helping people adopt adaptable capabilities, what the value of it can be, and some of the things you're going to have to go through to think about what's going on. There's a whole lot of other things, but I'll grab some stuff from what we've done at other places and put a list together for you.
Okay, and that is all the questions we had. So I'll go ahead and I will take the screen back. And then we can go ahead and, as you saw, you can connect with Mike on LinkedIn, and for the information on the PDU code, you can go on PMI's website and you can claim 1 technical hour. And I just want to remind you guys that this is something that happens every third Thursday of the month, and we have one coming up in January on Microsoft Teams. So we want to thank Mike for taking out the time and sharing his thoughts and his content. Hopefully you guys all found it useful. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a survey link after this, or it might redirect you automatically once you exit the meeting. Your input is really helpful. It helps us come up with the content for the future webinars and helps us continue improving this. So once again, I just want to thank Mike for taking the time and walking us through this. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you, everybody, and happy holidays. Enjoy the last couple weeks of the year, and hopefully you get some downtime to relax with family and friends. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Is that a question?
Oh, just thanks. All right. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you guys have a great holiday. Thanks.